Welcome everyone to the first casual stroll of the new year of 2023. It has been a very busy and very hectic holiday season, but now we're on the other side and we get to do something a little casual. Apologies for the Harrier that is taking off behind me. That is my work computer. Um, it every so often likes to remind me that it is still here. Anyways, welcome everyone to the stream. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards, and this is a casual stroll through the Great River. I've been doing these for almost a year now, I think. Maybe a little longer. Um, but over the course of the time that we've been running these, we have gone through all of Eriador, and now we're working our way through Rovanian. Back a few months ago, I had put up a poll, and instead of polling every month, what I decided to do was just kind of go down through all of the different regions in order. And the next one on the list is we're here to do today, the Great River. So, for those of you that are unfamiliar with what this stream is all about, this is a world design focused stream where I'm going to be talking about level design, world design, all the stuff that we do to bring Middle Earth to you in Lord of the Rings Online, at least from the landscape perspective. I'm not going to be answering any questions about things like game systems, PvMP, um, things like skills, lag, any of that stuff, because there are people on the team that are better suited to answer those questions than I am, and I'd much prefer they be the ones to answer those questions than me, because I just would not be able to give a great answer to those things. But if you have questions about landscape, about level design, about how we translate the map of Middle Earth into Lord of the Rings Online, and things like housing, which is kind of my pet baby right now, feel free to ask away. I'll do my best to answer as many questions as I can. But in the meantime, let's start our stroll through the Great River. As a reminder, too, sometimes I get caught up in talking with you all and I forget to drink. So if it's been a while since you've seen me have a drink of water, let me know. And I'll have some water or ginger ale to kind of help even out my voice through the stream. So, here we are at the kind of threshold of the Great River. Right behind me, you can see the woods of Lothlorien. Lothlorien was kind of one of the first post Moria regions. And the Great River is kind of the next region after Lothlorien, at least in terms of Rovanian contiguity. I don't think we went directly to the Great River. We kind of went our way down through Enedwaith and Dunland first before coming up through here. Now, Enedwaith is one of those regions where, like, I don't recall at least, doing much of the landscape work for this area, in large part because I was doing some of the early works for Rohan, which we'll get to in a later stream. But I pitched in a lot on some of the dungeon designs for this space, particularly the Linlight Gorge instance cluster. So I think at least here in Thinglad, we have kind of a darker take on what Lothlorien would look like. It's kind of Lothlorien without the magic. It still looks great, but it doesn't have this just kind of overwhelming presence of the elves of Lorien there. It doesn't. It feels like it's something on the edge of Lothlorien without actually being a part of Lothlorien. I think the Malorn trees on or I'm not sure if these are technically considered Malorns, um, but like personally, I like the look and feel of these trees a lot better than the Malorns of Lothlorien. They have a little bit more character to them with the big roots. Granted, most of these trees look like they're kind of on the verge of dying to some degree, but I feel like they feel a little bit more like trees than the Malorns in Lothlorien do, which is like it's a little, it's like trees are trees, but I think the ones in Malorn, or the Malorns in Lothlorien have a certain look and feel to them that is is almost unnatural, and um, doesn't really feel like it fits. Um, Let me turn off these. So turn off the floating names so that we're not seeing those everywhere we go. So take a quick look at the chat while I'm booking it around. I'm not using a mount this today. This is actually a quick ad hoc changing the location that I'm streaming from today, from our normal test server to a different test server just because of some build complications. So I had to very quickly recreate a new character and get them outfitted for the stream. I do like this little set of ruins here. I think one of the things that we did often when building ruins is they never really felt like they were an actual real structure. And running into this space, like this feels like it could have been a hall of some sort. I think we'd maybe want a little bit more crumbling walls here and a little bit more rubble around just to really sell that. Um, I could also see this potentially being treated as like more of an open air hall, where these columns here at one point may have had um, tarps or some other canvas kind of hanging off of them to provide coverage. So we'll go down through the questions real quick, and comments real quick. Ranator says, I collected all of your videos on thread and official forums. Some don't have YouTube uploads. I did see that thread, and that's something that hopefully we can point at Cordovan and see if you can get those missing ones uploaded. Let's see. So Stars and Rangers says, "What do you have a favorite type of landscape tree?" Um, I think the trees that were produced for Gondor, there was a whole set of trees that were made for Gondor that I think do such a great job and look great. Um, but I think if I had to say my favorite set of trees, the bin bowl pine trees. I think I talked a little bit about it um, in another stream, maybe when we were going through the Shire or through the Yonder Shire, how like really successful assets are ones where you can take it, drop it down, rotate it, and scale it slightly in any number of ways, and you have a single asset that just works and looks unique and looks different from almost every single angle that you come at it from. That's where I think the Swan Fleet and Cardalon, those new rocks that we got in, are also like really really effective because you can rotate them in a variety of ways and get a different look at every angle. And I think the bin bowl pine trees, are some of the first ones where we were really really successful at doing that. Um, and because of that, they're some of my favorite trees. Like I could walk around in those woods, and feel really good walking through that space because it feels like you're in a forest of unique trees, but in the reality is there's not a lot of individual trees that um, make up that space. We talked before about like wayfinding and whatnot, and as I'm walking around in here, like I'm seeing some great navigation points. Like coming up over the hill, you can see the kind of ridge line of Wildermore in the distance. You can see the tall statues here, which call things out, and then the hill that I'm climbing up on right now is just another great wayfinding tool for when you are like in Stangard, for example. You can pop out and you can kind of know where you need to go just based off of remembering where certain landmarks and POIs are as you're running around in them. All right, so Hirok04 says, "Why did you trim down the Anduin along Rohan? In Lothlorien, it is very wide, where it gets smaller again, which doesn't really make sense, to me at least." You're right, that doesn't make much sense. Typically, rivers, as they progress and continue towards where they eventually outlet, they do get broader and broader, in large part because there's just more and more cumulative water that's flowing through them as they continue down through all the little like tributaries and streams that kind of pool and collect their way through. Um, so I can't really specifically say why we made that decision. In part because I don't really remember, and in part because I wasn't specifically involved in the landscape design of this region. So I can't really hush you. I can't really speak to the specifics of why. Um, I think one of the things that I hope to be able to do with new regions and new landscapes as we make them is, you know, be thinking about those spaces as natural spaces first and foremost, so that we can further build a world that is both fantastic and fantastical, but also feels like it could be a real place. Um, it feels like it's inspired by reality. Um, things like Swanfleet and Cardelon, I tried really hard to impress upon it that sort of like look and feel. Um, and I think the further we get in the game, the further you progress in the game from the start of the game all the way through to where we are now, I think the more mature we get as designers, the more aware of these sorts of things we become, and the more effort we put into trying to create something that's more reflective of a real space as opposed to a theme park. Not that there isn't room, or value in things being kind of a little theme parky here and there, but there are certainly some aspects of design where designing like it's a theme park don't really help sell the realness of the space. Little Redhead 42 says, "I always wonder at ruins hubs why they're sleeping and eating and such. Where they are sleeping and eating such. It seems like a market square feeling to me, and I love it. It just leaves me wondering where they live." Oh, hey, big spider, what are you? Oh, that's right. We're in the Limelight Gorge, where everything is big and mean and nasty and will kill me if I look at it wrong. Well, not this character right now, but yeah, I think that's another thing that we've been a bit more successful at as we've matured as designers. We try to build spaces that feel like they could be lived in. There are certainly some aspects of um, hubs and whatnot that no one really like touches on all that much. Things like when talking about there's a great thread on the forums that was talking about like things that don't exist in the game but feel like they should, and it's talking about things like latrines and graveyards and cemeteries and whatnot. Things that are a part of that are a part of the reality of civilization. Excuse me, but things that we don't really include in what we build. And in part there is a you know there's part of it is like, okay, we don't really need to see where all of our npcs go to the bathroom, or we don't really need to see where they all sleep, because that's not entirely relevant to what we are telling narratively in those spaces. So there's always this balance of like, how much are we trying to make this a sim versus how much are we trying to make this a game. And those are two different things. Building a sim is very different than building a game. Let's see. Lomefine says, "There's a large portion of space between Lorien and the Great River. Are there any plans to use it?" So one of the things that our world design team does fairly regularly is we assess where kind of all the fill-in spots can be in the world, and we have a map, um, an internal map where we kind of go through and look at where all the like interesting spots to fill in could be. The spot between Great River and Lothlorien is, when we were putting that together, is a space that I affectionately called, and then was booed and hissed at by the rest of the team. I affectionately called it Lothmorian, because more Lothlorien. Uh, but um, but so there are always those kinds of spots around that we're aware of and might have something interesting we can do in them when we have the opportunity to do it. Um, that's what we did with the Wildwood. It's what we did with Swanfleet and Cardolan. It's what we did with the Undershire. And I think there's definitely an interest in the team in us going and doing those things more. And it, considering how well received the additions of the landscape were over the last year, not necessarily specifically regarding gameplay and endgame and any of that, but the how well received the additions to the landscape we made were. Like, people loved the Angle, people loved Yondershire, people loved Swanfleet and Cardolan, they loved Wildwood, they loved the idea of filling out the world, and I think that's definitely something that we want to continue doing. But it's something that when we do it, we want to do it kind of with a mind towards and an eye towards, like, okay, what level breaks do we need? Do we feel we need to better support? What areas might be kind of more interesting to go in that we haven't really like played around in those biomes all that much? I think um, one of the things that we are very interested in doing is, when we kind of loop back to doing more of the filling in the world side of things, is considering, let me turn off my UI so we can take in more stuff. Doing what we can to say, all right, so I think we've got the like alternate ways for people to get to 50 handled pretty well. So, for example, if we were to then say, all right, we want to do more fill-in regions, fill-in areas to kind of help provide other options for other level breaks. What's next? And I think by and large, both internally and from what we've seen from feedback, there's a great interest in looking at that like 50 to 65 range and seeing what we can do within that. Probably more like 45 to 65. But what can we offer in those sections to to kind of grow the options that players have for places they can go? Those areas may not necessarily uh, include continuing epic story, like Wildwood certainly didn't do that. They may not include um, alternate plot lines like the Before the Shadow stuff does, but at the very least, they'll have their own internal compelling stuff for them. But again, that's when we get to it. This coming year, we're not really focusing on kind of filling in gap stuff. We want to start pushing forward on our stories, the story that we want to tell. But who knows what next year will bring for us. All right. Sebes says, could the existing pathway to Wildermore beyond the broken bridge be open? There's an invisible wall on the river. It is a hindrance. We can't travel through this path. There are much more great spots on Great River that scream to be connected either through real path or portal. The Andan Gate in Lothlorien, pass into the High Knolls. That's blocked by ice. That doesn't need to be. Even a portal to the Brownland roads through Mirkwood would be a nice touch to have. So we connect things where it makes sense to. Sometimes we don't always do it. Um, I think the stuff we've done with Angmar to Carbronach, from Misty Mountains to Vales of Anduin, like those kinds of connections. Um, Part of why we've done them is because they are region breaks, region 1 to region 2. So it doesn't really hurt us to connect them in that way because the odds of us doing additional landscape on the in-between are fairly low. Not nil, but low. Much like how we tease parts of the landscape, that doesn't necessarily always mean that we're wanting to connect everything in that way. Um, I think the like you were talking about through the Brownlands and whatnot, and connecting in that way. Sometimes those have story considerations. Sometimes they have, um, does this make sense to allow players to kind of travel that distance unhindered in territories that are likely to be a lot more aggressive. In the case of Wildermore, I don't feel like there's any real specific reason why the Great River and Wildermore, as we're looking out over here, for example, couldn't be connected in some way. But since they're so close together, if we did connect them, it would probably make more sense for us to actually just do the landscape work to connect them. But again, it's a time and effort kind of proposition. Uh, Shmoo says quite a lot of Treebeard Pop wants to transfer their characters to live. Is this going to happen? I have no comment on that. That's not my area to talk about. Um, if/when any announcement regarding character transfers from Legendary Worlds happens, keep an eye out for it on official channels. Um, oh, great. The server is on rainy day, so we won't get quite as many cool views because it's raining out. So again, here we're talking about wayfinding, and you can see that mountain that I was on at the very beginning of the stream. So now we're walking into Stangard. So Stangard is kind of our proto Rohan. We knew we were going to Rohan when we were building the Great River. It was kind of meant to be this lead in to the region of Rohan. So we had a lot of the assets that we were planning to use for Rohan already built, intentionally so, for this space, and it kind of gave us the opportunity to kind of play around a little bit with how the different assets would work, what interiors might be like, what villages and towns for the Rohirrim would be like. So this is very much a like us starting to figure out Rohan, not from the mounted combat perspective, but from the like what the look and feel of a Rohirrim village would look like. This is also where we started playing around with what mead halls would look like. I'm not sure if I'll be able to get in. I can, yay! Sometimes we have quest restrictions in getting into these things. It would be nice if I could like super admin my way through those without doing hacky stuff. Um, but yeah, I think our mead halls do a good job of feeling like detailed and cluttered enough so that they feel lived in. But some of them can be a little tricky to work around. Like, I understand the fire pit being in the middle, but there's something is nice about being able to just like, you know, walk into a space and then just keep walking forward. So there's a degree of inconvenience associated with mead halls because almost all of them have obstructions right in the middle of the building, so that you kind of have to go around. So you don't always get the like cool cinematic approach that you kind of want to get when you're coming into kind of this big grand space. All right, we'll head back outside after having visited this mead hall. Soft Snake GR says filling the gap spaces like Wildwood region is good to exist, but is it worth the cost to make such a region for mid-level range? Most of the player base are either newbies or endgame already. So I think one of the things that our player base likes to do is spend time in Middle Earth. There are certainly a number of players that love endgame stuff. There are players that love PvMP stuff. But a lot of people are here to play the game to be in the world. And the more things we can do to help accommodate that and to bring to life the world, I think that overall benefits. There is value in the happiness of people who are enjoying the world, who log in and then be like, oh, this wall that used to be here is no longer here, and now there's this space beyond for me to go out and explore. I think that kind of experience is very powerful and very much desired by the player base within Lord of the Rings. I don't have any specific demographic information and market research information to back it up, back up that statement, but anecdotally, from everything that I've read on message boards and whatnot, the players of this game are very invested in the world of this game. And anything we can do to grow the world of this game, I think, is valuable. Some people have been playing it for 15 years, and while they may have a main character who is focused on endgame, um, they may not want to slog through all of the same spaces that they've been in over and over and over again. So being able to um, have something new for them to take a new character through, I think is really useful and beneficial. I love this tower. This is a great like little fake interior we have going on here. We don't do these very often, in part because like dayfile stuff can be a little tricky inside them. But thankfully it's not raining in here, which is great. But this is just like a nice little like unexpected. There are times where you might come across something like this and it's just a teleport door up. But I like the effort that's been put into this to make it feel like an actual three-dimensional space. It just feels good. Let's see. Kaifir asks, could any of the cottages or cots on the landscape be turned into instanced single-house neighborhoods? Um, so one of the things that's kind of on my plate to explore and see what the costs, both in terms of performance, are, but in terms of just like space that needs for it, is how big and small we can make neighborhoods. What feels good for the number of houses in a neighborhood, what's too many, what's too little, and I think each offering we've made, from the recent premium housing stuff from Rohan to Erebor to the one that I'm working on right now that is getting ready to be tested. Wink, wink. Um, we're always trying to see, one, what we can get away with, and two, how much the number of houses in a space affects the character of the space. And I think a single house neighborhood would be kind of interesting to do, but there are a whole lot of engineering concerns that could come out of it. There are a whole lot of UI concerns that could come out of it. And we need to kind of research and build the system to work with that single home in mind before we start making it something that we offer to players as an option for them to own. The worst part is so Sosnake GR, and this is in relation to Wildermore. The worst part is the south borders between Wildermore and Rohan. It looks like the huge wall from Game of Thrones, minus it being a physical wall and being made of ice. Sure. I think Wildermore is probably the like OG filling in the gap if I had to make that kind of joke. But I think it's something where we weren't quite sure how to fit it in. We also had to be building it in a way that wasn't accidentally allowing players in, and the easiest way to do that is a cliff. Apologies, I'm still kind of recovering from a bit of a cold. Yay, holidays. B414 asks, when discussing possible connecting to regions, is the level difference between them a factor, i.e. Misty Mountains to Vales of Anduin is a big jump? Um, it is not as big of a factor as if they were actually physically connected, because you kind of have to make that active choice to go through the portal, um, go through the particle effect lights to cross over into the new area. So it's not as much of a concern. Whereas if like the Misty Mountains and the Vales of Anduin were actually physically connected, we'd have more concerns. We experimented a little bit with Swanfleet and Eregion and Enedwaith to see like how okay we were with having those sorts of um, boundaries bleed and blend together in that way. Um, and I don't think we have a great sense yet of whether or not that kind of space was frustrating for brand new players. I think with the Swanfleet boundary in the east, one of the things that worked to our favor in that kind of area was the fact that there wasn't really a lot of content, specific like quest content, that was sending you to the border areas. Um, and because it wasn't sending you to the border areas, um, it it didn't feel as abrupt of a change, because yeah, you could see it in the distance and you could run there if you wanted to, but if you were focused on your quest, I rush gore bantam, um, you wouldn't necessarily be going there if you were following your quest. If you're going there, you're exploring. Um, by the way, so this is one of our test servers, and I know this is something that has come up in the past regarding the soft edges on water. So we're happy to say that soft edges are back, baby. Our tech artist extraordinaire kind of went through and figured out what had broken and got them working for us again. So we have soft edge water, which is awesome. Um, So Adderhelm asks, concerning assets, with each big update, how many assets get created from scratch versus reused, recolored, etc.? So we try to be somewhat economical in how we go about creating new assets. Um, I think if we have a set that works, that we can make tweaks to, we're generally more inclined to do that. If we can get bang for buck out of work we've already done and make modifications to that work so that it is different enough that it feels unique and feels like it's its own thing, then we generally try to lean into that. There are going to be times where we need to generate brand new asset sets because we don't have a set of assets that are particularly appropriate for a given you know um, cultural deco set. When this running through here is a great example of going through the Great River. We've got brand new Rohan stuff that came in as part of it, brand new Gondor stuff that came in as part of it, brand new um, like Haradrim stuff that came in as part of it. So there's like, when there is a need for us to generate something that is brand new and hasn't really existed before, we lean into that and we try to make that happen. Um, However, if we're kind of like, like we were doing with filling in the gaps, where we're not really going anywhere new, there's not really the dreaded B word budget for us to invest heavily in new asset sets, then we don't tend to do it. Update 35, for example, is a little bit of both, where we have the bulk of it is something that we've created with existing assets, but then there were parts here and there that we needed or wanted, like new variants on things, or we needed new structures altogether for purposes of gameplay, purposes of narrative, and so we found a way to make some of that work. So it's all about balancing the the economy of you know new assets versus existing functional assets. I'm gonna see if I can get a good view here. Hey, it's probably getting close to nighttime, which is why it stopped raining. Um, so Cytox asked about War Steeds. War Steeds are a game system thing, and they're out of my hand, so I'm not going to be able to answer that question for you, unfortunately. Um, Ranutar says, "Can we own a tower, please?" That's an interesting idea um, for a house. I think we let players own a tower as part of Rohan housing. One of the houses you get a secondary interior that is a tower up in the mountains. We affectionately called it the Wizard's Tower. Um, but I don't think we have any specific plans for tower-based housing yet. Both Orion and I have lots of big ideas for housing and lots of plans that we're kind of, with each housing release, we're kind of slowly pushing our way towards what our ultimate goals are. And it takes time, but when we get there, it'll be awesome. Um, So I know some people, regarding housing, like some people are not too thrilled about the Kingstead housing and how it's just kind of like in the middle of things. One of the things that is also on my plate to do is to investigate whether or not we can allow neighborhoods to exist in the same space as playable space. I think when we built the original housing neighborhoods, they were all kind of siloed off, physicsed up, because we were always just kind of under the assumption and expectation that you should have to teleport into housing, and not being in the housing instances in that space could cause weird things to happen. You know, as time has advanced and our knowledge about how the servers works have advanced, that may not necessarily hold true anymore, and it may be something where we can look in and change. And if us playing with that and testing that ends up working out right, then things like the Kingstead neighborhood, we could pull down the physics barriers on, um, and make it something where you could roll through it on normal instance layer without the impenetrable walls around it. Until we get that testing done, until we do the investigation and research, you know, that neighborhood is the way it's going to be. Um, I think it's interesting to have things like neighborhoods feel like they exist as part of the open landscape. Um, we don't really. I think the Rohan neighborhoods were an attempt at experimenting with that. So that experimenting on something that wasn't just siloed off. Um, and who knows? Hopefully, through some results of testing, we can like make some changes and move towards that idea. But it's going to take time for us to come up with that. Let's see. Rohan needs more house. Rohan demands more house. Wait till they develop heavy equipment. um, Dame Hypatia says perhaps we can have more urban neighborhood town square, like with flats and houses. So when I came back to working on Lord of the Rings, around was it, update 24, one of the first things I was tasked with doing was helping to prepare parts of the original game for the legendary servers. And I did some work around Breetown, pulling down the weird like mountains that were surrounding everything and replacing them with um, things that are more city-like, in part with the intent of maybe eventually building apartment housing in certain quarters of the neighborhood, of the town. So, with that said, um, our next few housing offerings, when we offer them, are not going to be Bree-based, human-based housing. Um, I think we have a lot of cool opportunities to provide interesting and diverse locations. And I think we're very human heavy. So going and providing some more variety in what we have for housing um, goes a long ways. And it might take us some time to get to apartment housing, whether that's in Breetown or in some other setting. But it's something that we've discussed and we've thought about. Being told to have a drink. I'm sorry about the cough. Sebest says open borders feel okay on lobby characters. The only problem is the aggro and red dangerous zones. It is too insane. It is insanely too high. Can you decrease it? Then nobody will be jumped by a boar. So that exists for a very specific reason. The aggro ping that exists when a very low level character is in a area that is much higher for it was because there were power leveling issues in the game that needed to be resolved, um, and that is why aggro ping exists. It is to disincentivize players from kind of bringing a low level character into spaces that they shouldn't be, and using them for XP gain or using them for loot gain. That is why it is there. It is to kind of keep players in their lane, basically. If you want to, hey rat, um, if you want to advance and you want to level up, the idea is we want to incentivize you to be in spaces that are appropriate for your character, not necessarily incentivize you to park yourself in a safe spot while you have higher level characters advancing you. Whether or not that is entirely valid in our current setting, in our current game, that's debatable, but that's why that exists. All right. Kaifir says, no spoilers, but are you excited for Lotros 2023? I am very excited. I've been working on update 35 since October. I'm working on update 36, 37, or 36, 37, and 38 right now. And I'm excited about us kind of taking the next step in our continuing narratives. It's been kind of on pause for a while. We've been busy, and I'm excited about being able to kind of get back to moving our story forward. I think we've got a lot of interesting things coming up. I think I'm looking forward to the opportunities to start really digging into the new landscapes that we're going to build. We haven't really started building new landscapes yet because there are some other things that we are working on first. But yeah, I'm enthused about update 35 through 38. I think we've got a good plan. I think it'll be exciting. I think it'll be interesting. And it'll take us to places that we haven't been before, which I think is another great thing. It's another growth of the world. There was some headache in the work we needed to do to prepare ourselves for what we're going to be building. Mostly in figuring out the logistics of where we're going to build it, what region we're going to build it in. Do we have enough room for it? Do we need to move things? So that's a fun um, mental exercise. Luckily, I did not have to do the bulk of that exercise. I just get to do the work after that fact. But yeah, I think 23 will be a good year. It'll be a fun year. A lot of people talking about houseboats. I won't lie, um, that is something that we have thought about. Druid's Fire says, "What kind of pointy-eared people do we get next for housing? You want to actually live inside a person? That sounds uncomfortable. Is there enough room for that?" Yeah, that doesn't sound cozy to me at all. Um, so back on the topic of uh, the Great River, we're coming up against, I think, one of our first major Gondorian ruins. Again, like this was kind of our first, you know, stab at building something that was supposed to be Gondorian. Um, we had dabbled a little bit in Enedwaith and in Dunland, um, but the further south we go, the more we kind of get into that territory. So this is kind of meant to represent that. This is us playing around a little bit, figuring out how to use these assets, figuring out how to make a you know make a town, make a city out of these assets. We had a little bit of experience with it in Anuminos. A lot of these shape forms have a similar feel to them as we had in Anuminos, but also trying to give them a character and a grandness to them that wasn't in Anuminos or is different from what was in Anuminos. I do love it when we build ruins that have been kind of subsumed by nature. And I feel like walking around in here, we probably could have done that a little bit more, had more like foliage and bushes kind of like encroaching along the edges of the buildings and, grass popping up here and there. All right, so I think I'm almost all caught up with all of our comments and questions. So Stars and Rangers asks, what do you like best about the early Gondor assets? Well, I didn't really get much of an opportunity to play with these because I was off in either Instance Land or in Rohan Land while we were building this region. I think one of the things that the Gondor assets do really well is they provide large building blocks that you can use to form other larger, more complex shapes out of, and that's what you like really want to see out of an asset set like this. And so here's what I'm talking about. Like there should be more of like this sort of stuff in these ruins where it's just like where the buildings meet the ground, have a little bit more foliage encroaching in on it. Even if it's dead brambles and whatnot, it still needs to have that little bit more. So yeah, I think the Gondor assets, like they do a good job of building. They give you some nice primitive shapes with a variety of silhouettes that you can work with to form out shapes. So I think that's where they're the strongest. Um, so we will book it over here, and I think we'll be crossing over. Once we cross the river, we'll end up crossing over into Rohan. At that point, we'll start going into some of the interior spaces because there are a couple of things in some of the interiors that I found that I want to like talk to a little bit. I know there's been some conversation on the forums regarding some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about. So we've made it. We have crossed the threshold. We've got the bird cannon off in the distance as your moment. And now we're in Rohan. So that does our tour of the landscape. There's I think one of the things that's kind of cool about the Great River region is it does have a variety of different biomes in it, but it doesn't feel like they are too wildly different from each other, too out of place. Um, so Sebeth says, regarding the aggro, I understand the reason in the past, but maybe it may be considered, maybe reconsidered, and the issues solved in different ways. I'm sad seeing your amazing work on Swanfleet, but at the borders, it's too punishing. Not even more Tahoe is safe. Yeah, and like I said, it may be something that we have to reconsider now. All I'm stating is how it is currently, and the reasons why it exists in that way. So we'll do a quick trip into one of the Limelight Gorge dungeons. So this is one of the spaces that I ended up building. And one of the things that I had a lot of fun in building this was like, this was supposed to be just kind of like a run-of-the-mill dungeon space. But one of the things that's fun about being a level designer is you're always looking for opportunities to add that little bit of like extra oomph to the space. So one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to have like visibility out into, you know, into the world. So the idea with this space is, you know, you're in here and you can look out through a crack in the walls. You're kind of behind a waterfall and you can see the Limelight Gorge in the distance, or Fangorn in the distance. Um, you know, it's like little stuff like that, which can kind of help make a space feel more like it's an open and alive space. Um, you know, one of the things too that's a level designer hallmark is the, you know, aspirational locations. Like, okay, I see this area here in front of me. I can't get there yet because there's no way, but if I keep following my way around, maybe I'll get to it. And then when you do get to it, you can kind of look back and see. And this is interesting. So this might be. This looks like it's a artifact of the new lighting system that we introduced, where the specular lighting, you know, the light source itself is casting a specular light color that's not appropriate for the light source. You know, because you see it's kind of like a white specular highlight when it should be more orange and yellow. Yeah, I think this is one of those spaces too where it's not heavily detailed, but it has, you know, just enough to it. So again, here we go with the like aspirational space. This is where I was before, and I've worked my way around. It's satisfying when you can kind of make that progress through spaces that you've visited before. I think I had built 2 spaces in here for this release. I think one of them was held back and was released with Fangorn instead. So I remember building another skybox. Yeah, so here we are with that. Where do I want to go now? I want to go here because this is something that, as I was doing my research, this no. I want this one. Cool. So yeah, this one wasn't too bad, but there were a couple of interiors that I had been into while I was going through Stangard where I was just like, this is too tiny, this is too compact, and I understand that it kind of fits the shape of the exterior that it's associated with, but it's one of the traps that you don't want to run into, or it's hard to avoid if you're trying to build an interior that's representative of the exterior. It's a little tricky because you don't want it to be the exact same size. And the reason why you don't want it to be the exact same size is you want room for your camera. There was a conversation going on the boards about how, you know, I think I had made some comment regarding, maybe it was the Ondershire taverns, where they had such a high ceiling, and how they shouldn't have such a high ceiling because they're hobbit spaces, but you know, they need to have that kind of height to the ceiling because they need that room for the camera. And I think some of these interiors, like here we are in the legendary item store in Stangard, where it's very similar, where it's just like, this kind of illustrates what I was saying is like, you can't have your camera really, you know, I think a lot of people tend to try to play with their camera where they can see maybe like 3/4 of their character's body, but the space is so small that, you know, you really don't get much room for your camera to move around. And so if we have the opportunity to build a space that has a little bit more camera space, and even if it doesn't really fit the like what the interior should look like for the exterior, or if it doesn't fit the character of the space, like with Hobbit stuff, we really need that extra wiggle room so that moving your character around isn't frustrating. Like there's a side room here, which is just this like little tiny thing, and I can barely get the camera out of my head in a couple of spots. And while it makes sense for that to be this shape, if you were to go outside and look at the building, it's still just like too tight. I would have rather not had that door open than have this door be openable than have it be something where you are just kind of forced into first person perspective. Dame Hypatia says, by the way, I love the water in Lotro. Lakes and rivers are one of my favorite things to admire. I think our water is an amazing feature. It looks great. It still holds up well. There are some things that with that I'd like to see it improve on, like how it reflects landscape can be a little sometimes. But overall, I think our water is done really well, and it holds up really well even after all these years. Um, the rabbit cave. Let's see. Had that in my list. There we go. Kingdom of Bunny. Seems like a good spot to kind of end our tour with the rabbit cave, the Kingdom of Bunnies, or Hidden Burrow as it's called. Um, so many bunnies. All right, so we're just about to wrap up here. I'll go through. If anyone has any last minute questions, feel free to drop them in, and I'll try to answer them for you. Um, but otherwise, we'll wrap up very shortly. Squirrel says, "How often is landscape zone building of a landscape uh, part zone paused or parked for a while because the story got diverted?" Usually, we will not build out landscape unless we know we are going to go there. There are times where, if we happen to have what we call lab weeks, where we will build out things that we're interested in building with the idea that they might get used in the future. So that's like what happened with Wildwood. Is I had some lab weeks after I think Minas Morgul, and I wanted to just like play around a little bit, see how quickly I could build out that landscape. And then, we were trying to figure out what we were going to do for the next year, and I had gotten one of our other designers hyped about the concept of what I was working on. So Wildwood was eventually able to turn into something that we used. The one of the other things that I'm working on right now for housing is something that like I'm working on it when I have time to work on it. We don't have a specific timetable for when we want to release it, but it will be like ready and baked to go whenever we do want to release it. That sort of thing. Let's see. Kingdom of Bunnies, as Narrow-Find. Kingdom of Bunnies, is that the behind-the-scenes name? Yeah, that is the name of the teleport location that I had to use to get here, was Kingdom of Bunnies. So stuff like this is the sort of thing where, a designer just had like a funny idea and they wanted to do something. And we have a few of those things here and there throughout the game. So Sebest says, maybe we can have more natural movements and waves on the water to make it less mirrory. So one of the things we do want to spend a little bit of time on is, looking at water, looking at what features we can add to it. I think with Gondor, we added the, kind of the shoreline effect, which has then been reused in a couple of, the idea behind it has been reused in a couple of spots. We've used it in Carn We've used it in Swanfleet and Cardalon for differing effects. But as we've hinted at the smell of sea salt, there's certainly an implication there, and we want to investigate what opportunities we have to kind of improve our water and improve our water caustics and how those sorts of systems work. Not to say that we'll be able to do it, but it is something that we are, kind of looking into and trying to come up with ideas for. So, all right, everyone, it is now past 3 o'clock, so it's time for me to head off and get back to working on things that I can't talk to you about. But thank you, everyone, for showing up and for hanging out and asking your questions. I enjoyed doing this stroll through the Great River, and we'll be back next month for our next region. I'm not sure what it is yet, but I have to take a look at the voting list and see what's next on the list after Great River. I think it's one of the Rohans. It might be East Rohan, um, but I'll have to double check to make sure. But anyways, thank you everyone for hanging out. Thank you for asking your questions, and I hope you have a great week and weekend. And we'll be having more information on patches and update 35 coming out soon, so pay attention to the official channels. We're hoping to have information on that being released fairly soon. So thank you everyone, and have an awesome afternoon.